is Janelle Molony, and I'm here in Wyoming at the Fort Laramie National Historic Site. And I'm ready to explore and see what my third great-grandmother and great-grandfather, Dr. James and Sarah Rousseau, might have seen when they came by and visited in 1864. So before I came here, I was told that once I get here and I step foot on property, that I would really be transported back in time. I don't know if that's true, but let's give it a try, okay? So come on, let's go. I guess it works. It's a thing. Come on, let's go explore. Hey, I'm Janelle Molony, and I am on the property of Fort Laramie National Historic Site. And actually the fort and most of its property is in front of me that you can't see, but I wanted to take a look back this way and show you that when immigrants are coming in from the Oregon Trail on the south side of the North Platte River, they are actually following the river quite close to the other side of those hills behind me. So coming down into the fort was not just something you could do willy-nilly. There was still a little bit of a travel that needed to happen before you got here if you wanted to visit. And if you were on the other side of the Platte River, on top of crossing over these little lumps, you would need to figure out how to get across, either by fording or paying for a ferry if that was accessible to you at that time. Some people tried to swim, but it really depends on the weather and what's going on with the water at that point and the water levels. I do know that in July of 1864, the Pella Company, being led by Nicholas Earp, did come to Fort Laramie. Specifically, Nicholas visited, and he had a bit of a rough time here. I think he kind of overstepped his bounds, and I'll show you where that happens in just a little bit. But I'm reading a selection right now from Immigrant Tales of the Platte River Raids, where in the back of the book, we actually have an appendix with source documents so that you get to see what the immigrants and soldiers are saying about things for yourself and draw those conclusions for yourself rather than trying to rely on a historian to tell you everything. So we're looking at his letter from April 2, 1865, where he's writing back to a friend in Iowa. And he says about coming up to Fort Laramie that we went on with tolerable good luck and speed, considering the scarceness of grass for our animals, until we got to Fort Laramie, which we did on the 7th day of July, just 1 month and 7 days from the time we crossed the Missouri River. And on we went without any serious trouble until, and then he starts to tell the story of the Platte River Raids in his version and his words, which are quite colorful. But I just wanted to point that out, that this wasn't just a little easy turn off the road. They still had a little ways to come before they could enter the property. And also, immigrants at this time in 1864 were absolutely prohibited from bringing their animals and their wagons onto Fort Laramie ground because the military needed the resources here. They needed the grass, they needed the hay for their own horses, and they could not afford to have tens of thousands of immigrants coming through with 4 or 10 or 20 animals gobbling it all up when they really did need those resources for their own staff. All right, so let's take another look around elsewhere. I can't wait to tell you more of the story. Looking back behind me, we have in the background the parade grounds of Fort Laramie, and I just wanted to stop here because of the tents that are on display today. And it looks like there is some kind of a presentation, so there's some kind of a cookout going. It smells really good. And then we have this large building here that we'll talk about in just a minute, but I wanted to pause because we have such a great setup to talk a little bit about Sarah Rousseau's experience when she came to almost Fort Laramie. Of course, as a wheelchair-bound woman, she was not able to easily get about, and of course they're traveling on the north side of the North Platte River. So it would have been very inconvenient for her to cross the river and then come down here, but her husband did. Dr. James Rousseau came and visited the fort, and I want to take a look in Sarah's diary and see what she has to say about that. We're looking at her entry from July 7th of 1864. She says, having traveled about 6 miles this morning brought us as opposite Fort Laramie. The doctor has gone across to Laramie to see if there's any letters for us. He has come back, brought 2 letters with him. I'm not sure who they're from. The only thing I can guess is that maybe one was sent for Marianne, her daughter, but otherwise, I don't know. She says Laramie has quite a picturesque appearance from this side of the river. There is a good many Indians around, but we have not been disturbed by them. Okay, so remember that really long blue building? We are now upstairs in that building that was the barracks. And so behind me, you can see lots of beds and military uniforms. But in 1864, the guys who were stationed here at Fort Laramie, most of the soldiers, were not exactly well equipped for a big deal like the Platte River raids of 1864. Some of the men that had come across were not exactly the best quality of a soldier. So perhaps they got mustered here so that way they could do something useful for the country that didn't involve having to be part of a real war. Some of the guys that were here were actually sent as turncoats from Confederate losses, where the general was able to give them an option. You can either be a prisoner of war or you can come out and serve the Union Army here in the Nebraska Territory, or eventually Idaho Territory and Wyoming State. And Brigadier General Robert B. Mitchell was in charge of overseeing that entire district. Nebraska district even included Colorado. So it was a very, very large area for him to be managing. And when those gentlemen decided that they didn't want to cooperate, or they were being a little ornery or misbehaving, even though they had been given that second chance to be here instead of being in a prison camp, Brigadier General Robert B. Mitchell also had what we would now consider to be like a chain gang. So he could order them to march off for a while and handle those bad feelings and bad words and bad tempers and attitudes by physical labor. And so that was something that was going on here in 1864. There is I would say one of my favorite records from a soldier who was here during the time of the Platte River raids, and seeing some of the responses coming through from the military men is the account of Eugene Ware. And that is publicly accessible online. Google Eugene Ware and you can read his diary. And he has really good stories about what's going on here and the misbehaving misfits and the drunks that he's responsible for. And he says they just can't even be bothered to do anything that they've been asked to do. But he also has a really interesting perspective because he's seeing the Platte River raids excitement happen, and excitement meaning fear. Everyone's scared and they're hearing bad things are happening, but he knows that the Brigadier General is holding court elsewhere down in Nebraska. And so when everyone's like, what do we do? And they all want help, he is not near enough to be able to respond in an efficient manner. So he's rushing back after handling some court cases, because he's also provost marshal out here. And so he rushes back and he gets to Deer Creek Garrison a little too late. to really make an impact, to make peace. He wanted to make peace. He wanted to say, hey, what was going on with the Plains Indians that were very upset, but it was just too late. By the time he got here to Fort Laramie and he discovered what had happened underneath Colonel William O'Collin's watch, the brigadier was not very pleased. Maybe one of the things that would have upset him is that the colonel authorized a skirmish or an intervention or a kidnapping or a hostage situation with Blackfoot Sioux Chief Bill Grass. After the Platte River raids finished, there was a soldier stationed here that said, hey, I remember there was a Sioux chief that came through just a couple of weeks ago saying that he was going to do this other thing in Utah. And isn't it just so interesting that after he passed through here, all of these attacks happened on the immigrants? So he used that conjecture to say that Chief Bill Grass was responsible. So under Collins' watch, the 11th Ohio located him a little bit south of the Platte Bridge Station, or as we call it, Fort Casper now. And soldiers were dispatched from there to go meet Chief Bill and to interrogate him about his whereabouts and what he did or didn't do, or what his participation was in the raids. And at that point, they had a skirmish that lasted 45 minutes and 14 Plains warriors were murdered. And just a little backstory on that. They were not involved at all. They weren't even in the area. They did go to Utah as they said they would. And so they were actually returning on their way home when they were confronted by the 11th Ohio. And in that skirmish, they took in 22 women and children belonging to Chief Bill's tribe, belonging to his band. So they brought them here to Fort Laramie and kept them captive with the threat to Chief Bill that if he, again, having nothing to do with the raids, if he did not go and find the missing Fanny Kelly, who was kidnapped on July 12th, then his women and children would not see another day. So it's very sad information that we're getting from the Platte River Raids story coming out, and how that makes our military men look. Stuff to think about. This costume's no fun without sunglasses. All right, so where I'm standing now is where we would be looking at the settler's house that was established in 1863. And this is where we had a little bit of a troubling situation with Nicholas Earp, yes, father of Wyatt Earp. When he came here in 1864, he visited and he probably had himself a drink, maybe, if he could get away with that. But I want to read from Sarah Rousseau's diary about what happened. Earlier, I read from Nicholas Earp's letter of his, coming to Fort Laramie in passing or getting here in passing, just like 2 lines. But there's so much more to the story. So if we go to Sarah's diary and we look at Friday, July 8th, she comments on what Mr. Earp was getting up to the night before when they got here on the 7th. We came pretty near having an unpleasant time last night. We have to keep close watch day and night over the stock. Mr. Earp went to see about the guards, and he found they had gotten up a dance. And he told them that they must quit their dancing and be on duty. Well, one of the soldiers told him to mind his own business and ordered him off. Now, that's a big deal because Nicholas Earp was a sergeant, and in Iowa, he was a provost marshal. So he might be thinking he knows a thing or two, and he might be a little bit higher rank than this so-and-so that he's engaging with. But this soldier knows that this dude, not in uniform, not on duty, is not going to be telling him what to do. So this soldier Ooh, we have flying ants here. This soldier ordered Nicholas Earp off. It made him awful mad, and he was for killing. He used very profane language, and he could hardly be appeased. But he cooled down after a while, and all was quiet. So, while they were here, while Dr. James Rousseau and Nicholas Earp were here on July 7th, Dr. Rousseau picked up some mail, and Nicholas Earp basically got themselves escorted back off the property to go back up to their camp on the north side of the North Platte River. I'm inside where the U.S. Post Office was at the fort, and this is where Dr. James Rousseau would have come to get his letters. He got 2 while he was here. It's very possible that he would have been able to overhear a little bit coming in on the telegraph lines. For backstory and like how would he know what the telegraphs were saying, Dr. James Rousseau was a county postman. He was actually the first county postman in Marion County starting in 1845. And so he had a post office or a little station on his property, which is now in Bussey, Iowa. And he would have known how to listen to the telegraph line. So something interesting that happened here is when Fanny Kelly and Sarah Larimer's train came through at the same time as the Pella Company, but they were on the south side of the river. When they came and they checked with the telegraph operators and to see if there was anything dangerous that they needed to be aware of, you know, are the roads clear ahead? Is everything safe ahead? They were both, Fanny and Sarah, assured that the roads ahead were completely safe, nothing to worry about. Now, if there was any suspect, Dr. James Rousseau would have heard it, and he would not be subject to being told whatever the telegraph operator felt like telling someone one day. In some accounts, they would kind of just tease the immigrants coming through. Like some of them would say, "Is there grass ahead?" And they would joke and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, like bilgegrass or dry grass or green grass, or what do you mean by grass?" And they would just totally tease them. But Dr. Rousseau wouldn't have been able to be teased because he can hear the lines. So as I'm walking around Fort Laramie, kind of noticing that there's basically nothing here that talks about the immigrants on the Overland Trail and Oregon Trails. Doesn't talk about any of them visiting or interactions with the Union Army. Doesn't really talk a lot about even the relations that they had or interactions, good or bad, with Northern Plains Indians. I don't know if that is on purpose, just to sort of keep that singular approach or just singular display, but I really feel like I can't be the only one here saying that that's definitely missing, and I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed, really, because there's so much more to the story than just the guys that lived here temporarily. You know, what were they doing and who were they interacting with and who was stirring up trouble and how did they engage with the Indians, and it's just not here. So I'm here in the settler store, and it's a busy time right now, as it would have been in July of 1864, especially around Independence Day. A lot of the immigrants that are coming through that would eventually be caught up in and experience the Platte River raids were here for those 4th of July celebrations. Here in the settler store, they would have been perhaps given libations from the settler Seth Ward, who eventually also opened a civilian mercantile about 9 miles west of here. He opened Ward and Gurrier's at 9 Mile Ranch, where the Sand Point trading post was as well. So if you're wondering, what did people do for the 4th of July in 1864 besides coming here and having a drink? Well, that evening they had some booming cannons going off in the air, and people say, oh yeah, it's kind of like fireworks. No, they actually had regular munitions testings morning and night, but I'm sure that would have been very exciting for the immigrants to hear, and if they were local, to see. But very specifically in July of 1864, the fort celebrated and had a big presentation that included what has been documented as a Negro performance here on the premise. Now, that could mean bringing in, as they were called, Ethiopian performers or actual African Americans to do some kind of a song and dance routine, or it could mean soldiers performing this routine in blackface. Now, this is a really controversial thing that isn't comfortably discussed, and it's not in any of the literature that I'm seeing here. So let me just clarify a little bit on this. Having entertainment here at the fort would have been a lucrative thing and also a needed, almost like a desperately needed endeavor for the soldiers here. So they wanted entertainment. They were bored. And also, this kind of gave immigrants some reason to spend money here. And that was good too, because the soldiers wanted that. The government wanted that, of course. And so one of the things that I learned in my research for Platte River Raids was that Colonel William O'Collins was able to take a cut from every ticket sale that those immigrants were paying. And so he profited from those controversial events. And then, from what I understand, after a successful night, he raised the ticket prices and had an encore so that he could put a little bit more in his own pocket.
Good afternoon, Fort Laramie. In 5 minutes, there will be a lunch cooking demonstration at the infantry campus.
Earlier I mentioned that William O'Collins was not well appreciated at the point that Brigadier General Robert B. Mitchell arrived on site and saw how Collins had been handling things from the fort all the way up through the Black Hills of Idaho Territory in 1864, including taking Blackfoot Sioux Chief Bill Grass's women and children hostage. And it was always Brigadier General Robert B. Mitchell's intention to establish and maintain peace on the plains. However, the guys he put in charge kind of were a little bit trigger happy or had other motives for the decisions that they made. Well, back behind me are some of the officers' quarters, which may have housed at one time Colonel Collins. And from what I told you earlier, I'm going to take a look at Immigrant Tales of the Platte River Raids, where we get to the end of the story and we see how the Brigadier General addresses Colonel Collins after the fact. All right, so we're looking sort of in the middle of the book towards the end of the narrative of the South Bank Trail travelers, or those on the Oregon Trail or the Mormon Road, and it's had many other names in literary history. But we're looking at the day after Brigadier General Robert Mitchell arrived at Fort Laramie, and he was able to have a little chat with Colonel William O'Collins. And at that point, Collins was relieved from the command of the post at Fort Laramie and given general supervision of all posts and detachments west of Julesburg in the District of Nebraska. And the brigadier at this point establishes his new headquarters right here, and he starts trying his best to turn things around, or turn over a new leaf and I guess untangle the mess that's been created now. The colonel's demotion is announced or discovered and talked about by the next morning, and Sergeant Lewis Hull writes about that in his daily reports. Change reported in this department. Major Wood to command the post. Lieutenant Reeves to be Inspector General in the department. Later in the Indianapolis Star, news journalist kind of writes a scathing little report and says the force at the fort is inadequate to the task, and that the Brigadier General is now busy instituting measures to punish the Indians. It's not quite what they were up to, but maybe that's what the journalist hoped he was up to. Pretty soon afterwards, there's a report that ends up in the Indianapolis Star, and this anonymous journalist says that the force at the fort is inadequate to the task, and comments rather negatively on Collins. But not all newspapers really lay into him. Some say that he did a good job in his demoted rank and that he continued to serve the Union to the best of his capacity. What an awesome trip! It's in here, I just missed it. Oh my goodness, really are flying ants. Well, I wasn't expecting to get catcalled looking like this, but yeah, that happened. Pretty cool, huh? But you know what's missing? Don't tell anyone. That one. That one's missing. I'll bet her.